Virtual desktop versus Oculus Link. Big debate over which is better, you know, overall experience wise, visually, reliability, you name it, we can debate over it all day long. And a lot of people's experiences vary as well. So my experience that I'm going to talk about today, you know, yours may vary depending on what hardware you have. We're talking CPU, GPU, you know, router for your wireless connectivity when it comes to virtual desktop. It's all going to make a big difference across everyone. So you might say the question is difficult to answer, but the reality of it is, from a technical standpoint, the question is very easy to answer. Oculus Link, with a USB 3 port and a decent quality cable, whether it's aftermarket or whether it's genuine Oculus, is by far the better experience, both visually and as far as smoothness goes. Now, I'm not primarily a sim racer actually. My channel is primarily sim racing and VR, as you guys probably all know. So we'll talk about, you know, sim racing to start off with. When it comes to sim racing, there's two very good reasons to still have your headset plugged in. The first one is that it is visually a much better experience than virtual desktop. For me, virtual desktop, even with the bit rate at 150 and on medium resolution in virtual desktop, it's still nowhere near as sharp, as clear, and the compression, if you look for it, is more noticeable than over Link. So for sim racing, you know, especially as you're going to be seated, where having wireless connectivity doesn't matter, I would use the cable. The second reason for that is because it keeps the headset from discharging so quickly. It doesn't charge on a 1-to-1 ratio, so it will gradually lose its charge still, because ultimately a USB-C port can't put out enough, you know, from our motherboard or a graphics card, can't put out enough amperage to keep it charged, you know, versus the drain that's being used. But it will last hours, whereas if you use virtual desktop, you know, wirelessly, you'll be lucky to get your 2 hours that we're sort of quoted for the Quest 2's battery life. So far better image quality, a far smoother experience, and we'll talk about this in a little while, and of course, you know, the battery stays charged. So for sim racing, definitely plug your cable in if you can. If your sim rig is miles away from your PC, then you're going to have to go over virtual desktop. And again, this is, like I said at the very beginning, this is my experience and my opinions. Some of you may be happy with the virtual desktop experience in sim racing titles. So it's just my opinion here and just my experiences. Before anyone gets the arse and shouts at me in the comments that virtual desktop's fine and it's amazing, because we know the internet and the world is full of different opinions and different people. But yeah, sim racing cable, definitely for those reasons. When it comes to say first person shooters, for example, it is such a big advantage having the freedom to turn around on a whim and not have to pay attention to where your cable is. You know, if you hear people coming from behind you and you want to spin round to shoot them and defend yourself, you can spin around. When you then spin back round, you don't have to think, which way did I just spin, and spin back round the opposite way to make sure you're not twiddling your cable up. Yes, you can use a few different applications that will give you a circle on the floor, a spiral on the floor, an arrow. You can even get one that gives you a little beep when you get to a certain number of turns. But ultimately, it's all a little bit distracting when you don't have to have it. And again, everyone's experiences and opinions may vary here. For me, those solutions are distracting and I don't like them. I don't want to have to think about how many times I've spun around. Have I just heard a warning beep? Have I looked down at the floor recently enough to make sure I haven't twiddled my cable up? I just want to play the game that I'm in and really get into it and really have some fun. So if I want to spin round 10 times, I want to spin round 10 times. If I want to lay on the floor to snipe somebody without a cable wrapping around my feet or pulling on my head, then that's the way I want to play. And these are all the advantages you have. You know, if I want to do a barrel roll across the floor of the front room, then I want to do a barrel roll. So these are all the advantages you have with virtual desktop that Link obviously just cannot compete with, because it's a cable and it's attached to you. So for first person shooters, in spite of the fact that if you look, you can see the compression you know, in just the right places that you won't be able to using Link. In spite of that, and in spite of the fact that to get a really smooth experience, a smooth, reliable experience, I do find that I have to turn the graphics settings down a little more than if I'm running over Link. It's, long story short, the Oculus, you know, reprojection sort of algorithms, you know, the drop frame algorithms are very refined and work very well, whereas Virtual Desktop, I believe, doesn't have any, because I'm sure the developer said, and someone mentioned this in an email to me the other day, that the developer has said he basically doesn't know how to program, you know, drop frame and reprojection algorithms, so there just isn't any. This is an interesting point though, because that would imply that Virtual Desktop is actually doing all of the rendering and it's not using Steam VR or the Oculus software, which actually is, I suppose, correct, yeah, because you don't have to have the Oculus software running. Steam VR does run, but yeah, interesting. So I'm not 100% on that, but what I am 100% on is that you will, unless you get your settings down low enough to get a really steady frame rate, you will notice the odd dropped frame. Again, this would depend on your GPU and CPU performance as well. So, but it won't be quite as smooth as over Link. And again, the compression, if you look for it, is a little more noticeable. So, you know, overall the visual quality, but the trade-off, you know, of having slightly lesser visual quality and perhaps the odd dropped frame, you know, if your hardware's not up to it or if you've got your settings a little too high, is well worth it for the freedom that you get in those first-person shooters, or in those, or not even just first-person shooters. Games like Asgard's Wrath, you know, where you're fighting people with swords and shields and bows and arrows and what have you. You know, you still want to be able to, there's enemies coming from all around you, you still want to be able to just turn around. What was the other one I was playing? Oh, I've forgotten what it's called now. It's like a Streets of Rage, but in VR. And again, there's guys coming in from all around you. The ability to just spin round and, you know, punch them and kick them without having to worry about that cable is just so nice. You know, it's why I sold my G2 really and got a second Quest 2, because no matter how much sharper the G2's graphics were in the center that was actually sharp, and how much more vibrant the colors were, and they were, it just, you know, the ability to play these games wirelessly, I just couldn't go back to having a wire. Anyway, that's a different video altogether. But yeah, so for sim racing, I definitely run the wire. For first-person shooters, I will definitely use Virtual Desktop in games that it works with. Here's the other negative for Virtual Desktop. It doesn't work on every single game. Some games don't work at all. Other games half work, but have problems. So like maybe the controllers aren't recognised properly. Maybe they show up as Vive controllers. That happens in a few different games. And maybe it works, but it just isn't a smooth enough experience, and it's stuttery and it's just not very good. So in the games that it works well, Virtual Desktop is a complete game changer, you know, and especially since that update back in, was it October or November, where there was a big update that reduced the latency massively, because this is the other thing we need to talk about, latency. You know, previously, if you moved your controller quickly in front of you, I could tell a slight delay. And after that update, I did a video about it at the time, it was 18 point something, that completely disappeared. And there's been an update recently as well that adds to the controller prediction algorithm, and that's made that a little smoother as well. So it's forever getting better and getting more refined and supporting more games. You know, so where it does work well, you know, 100% definitely use it, definitely have it, you know, as an option. And in games it doesn't work well, for sim racing titles or flight sim titles, or even Star Wars Squadrons, which is not a simulator, but you sat down at your desk or in your chair or whatever, keep it plugged in, better visuals, smoother experience, and it keeps it charged. So yeah, finally, I suppose latency is the other thing to chat about compared to the two. In real world testing, so we're not talking about bringing up a tool and measuring the difference between 5 milliseconds and 10 milliseconds, because you're not going to notice that anyway. In real world usage, for me, I don't notice any latency of any degree of importance using Virtual Desktop, apart from when I'm playing beat based games like Beat Saber and like Pistol Whip, where you are acting on the beat of a track. Now you hear the sound and then of course you react to what you hear, or you try and predict when the beat's going to come and do it that way. Now I've been a DJ for 20 years or so, so my ears are quite fine-tuned to beat matching, obviously, because it's the main part of the job. So if sound and visual connection is ever so slightly adrift, I notice. You know, I could probably tell a 10 millisecond delay quite easily, whereas perhaps some other people that haven't spent 20 years fine-tuning their ears might not even notice. So like on Beat Saber, for example, in virtual desktop, I can tell there is a very fractional delay. Now, I'm not good enough in Beat Saber for it to be a problem. I don't play on a hard enough difficulty for it to be an issue. But if you do, then you may find that fractional delay, you know, bugs you a little bit. It would me, to be honest. Whereas in Oculus Link, I don't notice that delay. So without having got any tools, software to measure the latency, I can tell you that virtual desktop does have a little more latency than what Oculus Link does. And if you're susceptible to that like me, you pick up on it, you will tell the difference. But depending on what you're playing, like first person shooters, doesn't make any difference. You literally couldn't care less. Doesn't affect the gameplay at all. And latency over Link, like I say, I can't notice any latency perceivably, you know, myself. I'm sure it can be measured. Of course it can, everything can. But as far as affecting your experience and your gameplay, no, it's absolutely fine. So that really is my comparison and my summary of the two. Use virtual desktop in games that benefit from wireless connectivity, and use Oculus Link, either a genuine cable or an aftermarket cable, a good one, in games that benefit from being plugged in. And that really is the answer. They both work well in their chosen applications. You make a couple of sacrifices with virtual desktop, but you're doing it to gain complete wireless freedom, where you can spin around and do handstands and backflips and whatever the hell you want in real life in your room, and not have to worry about winding cables around your ankles or twiddling the one around above your head, or it, you know, pulling a little bit. So yeah, there we go. There's my comparison and my summary. So my opinion is get both, have them both available to you, because both have their applications, they both work well, and they're both well worth having. So as always, thank you very much for watching, and take it easy.